Awesome Mayo here with today's WBE lesson, Add Vision to Brilliance. It's a higher version of brilliance. One of the biggest lessons that you will ever learn is that brilliance is everywhere. It's around us every day as long as you know where and how to look. There's no shortage of brilliance, but there's always a shortage of vision. Every single successful business is always based on at least one seed of brilliance. I want you to gather that seed, use that seed, and plant not a tree, but an orchard. Most people view the world through a lens of small-mindedness, and that filter works as a shackle. It immediately smothers brilliance at birth. Before you program yourself to think big, you have to unprogram yourself from thinking small. This takes effort and skill, but once you do it, you'll see opportunities everywhere. Everywhere that you look, you'll see restrained brilliance that's just waiting for you to add a little vision. Here are a few examples. Angelo Mariani developed a drink that became very popular. He billed it as a medical toxin that could help with fatigue, depression, sexual performances, OMG, and all sorts of other stuff. U.S. President McKinley and even the Pope all endorsed the drink, and Angelo's fame was going to live on until people came to understand the dangers of the ingredients, which included alcohol. No bueno. Angelo never came up with another suitable way to make the beverage, so eventually he went out of business. And at the same time, an American pharmacist saw this, and he decided to copy the idea, but he had a bigger vision. He saw a much broader audience for the drink than just as a medical toxin. He thought the audience could be the public at large. And when the same thing happened to him and his ingredients were outlawed, instead of going out of business, he made a few tiny changes to take out the illegal ingredients because he didn't have the same limitations of just being a medical toxin. And by using Angelo's exact same idea, but with a larger audience than just purely medicine seekers, by adding a little vision, not only was his idea more successful, but he was also more resistant to the changes that destroyed Angelo's business. And by moving it to a larger audience and making only minute changes, the pharmacist's idea thrived. And he named the drink after the ingredients used to make it: coca leaves and cola nuts. That's how John Pemberton started the empire of Coca-Cola. Most people have never heard of Hans Lippershey. He was a German guy that's given credit for inventing the telescope, or at least he's the first one to get a patent on it. And it was a great way to make faraway objects seem closer, and Hans thought it would be a good military tool to use in battle. Then another guy came along, and with the tiny change, he revolutionized the world of science. This new guy's idea was so groundbreaking that after he presented it publicly, everybody forgot about Hans, and now people think the new guy is the one who invented the telescope. So what was his idea and who was he? Well, he saw the telescope and he added a different vision, literally. He thought it would be used in a much larger way, or could be used in a much larger way, an out of this world way. He looked at the telescope and he thought that instead of looking across a battlefield or into a house that was across the street, it would be much more interesting to do something that today we think is obvious, but at the time he changed the world. He took the telescope and he pointed it at the sky. His name was Galileo. Moving along, this is a scene from the first film, the first movie ever made. The motion picture camera was invented with this short film. The guy who invented it is Louis Le Prince, and he got the idea for the camera after a night of drinking with me, but you've probably never heard of him, and that's kind of weird. The guy who invents something as amazing as movies and you've never heard of him? Why is that? Well, that's because one day when he was on his way to the UK to get a patent on his revolutionary idea, he was about to win a legal battle that would change his life forever. So he boarded a train, he waved goodbye to his family, and he was never seen or heard from again. His body and his luggage were never found. He disappeared. And to this day, what really happened to him is still a mystery. But historians today think what the family said at the time, which is that one of his competitors, the one he was about to beat, had him killed before Le Prince could become the motion picture legend that he was on his way to becoming. Now that's kind of crazy, right? To accuse somebody of murder over an argument around an invention may seem kind of crazy. And if the accusers are right, then this guy, the competitor, is kind of evil. At least it would seem so, right? So who was this competitor? The competitor was this guy. His name was Al. And to see how understandable it was to accuse him of murder, all you have to do is see how Al dealt with other competitors. Al was a crazy mother grabber. To undermine a competing businessman's idea, he used to repeatedly and publicly electrocute dogs, cats, and horses. He even filmed the electrocution death of an elephant. This is the actual footage you're about to see. This elephant that you see, you're about to watch it die. You're about to see Al publicly electrocute the elephant, and then he filmed it. What we are watching is the film that he made. He filmed the death. And remember, he did all of this to make a competitor look bad. Keep that in mind. He was only doing this to make a competitor look bad. Watch this. Yeah, that's Yeah, that's a little beyond crazy, isn't it? And he used to invite the media, and he used to do these executions, these torture events at these public events. And this is where the term electrocution was actually developed. It was invented, at least into what it means today. It was after seeing these horrific PR stunts that people in the media came up with that term, electrocution, to describe the unbelievably terrible things that they were seeing. And when electrocuting animals wasn't enough, he turned to people. Al developed America's first electric chair, and because of the reckless way that he made it, the first execution took about a full 8 minutes. It was said by observers that it would have been quicker and more painless and more humane to use an axe. And Al did all this because he wanted people to associate his competitor with death. These electrocutions and all this torture that he was doing, these were done by using a competitor's idea, and he wanted to make sure that when people thought of his competitor, that they thought of a gruesome death. That's why he was doing all this. But guess whose idea was better? Al's competitor, a guy named George Westinghouse. His idea was better, and later Al admitted that he knew it all along, which makes all the torturing and killing seem even worse. He was doing all that to prove a point that he knew was wrong. But amazingly, everything that I just said has been swept under the rug, and today none of that is what Al is remembered for. So what is he remembered for? Well, one day he saw this, a light bulb. And although he didn't invent it, in fact, it had been around since before he was even born, all of the inventors of the time were focused on lighting one light bulb. But Al had a vision. Instead of lighting one light bulb, he used the same concept to light several light bulbs. A seemingly obvious connection, yet nobody except him made it, and history has been rewritten so well that most people would hardly believe that Al's full name was Thomas Alva Edison. And by the way, after LaPrince died, Edison took full credit for Prince's idea. I'm not saying that he killed him, but he wasn't heartbroken over the death, and he did profit from it. Here's the point, and my goal is not to downplay or minimize the brilliance of anybody. This isn't to deny brilliance, but to define it. Think about each example, whether it's Coca-Cola, Galileo, or Edison. Each of the men in those examples took existing brilliance. They took ideas that were already developed and already invented, and they added a very simple ingredient, vision. That was their brilliance, their vision. And that missing ingredient, the power of vision, brings its own brilliance. The process of taking an existing concept or idea and adding a level of scalability, looking at a piece of brilliance and identifying a broader utility, seeing a larger application, that in itself is genius. It's brilliance. One of the worst questions that people ever ask me are things like, what's the fastest, easiest way to make money in real estate, or, whatever business they're trying to get into. And the core problem with that mentality is that what they really want me or you or whoever they're asking the question to, what they want that person to accept is the premise that they will give the least of themselves to whatever project they undertake. So not only will they approach any potential business with handicapped ambition and tenacity, but on top of that, on top of giving so little respect to their work and to their goals, on top of that, they're going to be impatient. They'll say things like, I need it to work immediately. I need something that'll work fast. And this is all LC language, and it's all code for I'm so eager to give up and so unwilling to take my work seriously or invest emotion into my efforts that I need to do something that's so irrelevant that even a half-assed effort is not required. And ironically, because of their attitude, because of the way that they look at things, they're ensuring that it's exponentially more likely that they will quit rather than succeed. If you start a business that you don't care about, you're going to have a business that you don't care about. We've talked about that many times. These people will rarely understand that this is a self-imposed problem that can be fixed in seconds with the right perspective. It's much easier for them to victimize themselves with chants like, I already tried that and it doesn't work. And they're not realizing that the way you treat opportunities does not define them, it defines you. My point is that most people are not the ones you want to follow. If you think like most people think, you will get what most people get. Now, with that said, I want to tell you something. If you bring the right approach, if you take things seriously and you view opportunity from the correct perspective through the lens that I teach, then this lesson, today's lesson of adding vision to brilliance, is one of the fastest ways to change one's financial situation. This is one of the fastest ways to go from 0 to the 1% and well beyond. This is one of those lessons that once you learn it, it's like, I once was blind, but now I see. It's like, you're seeing the world in black and white now, and then you start seeing it in color. And I guess every lesson is kind of like that. It's why I share so much feedback, so that you can see how important and life-changing this stuff can be for the right people with the right mentality. But with this lesson, adding vision to brilliance, it's a real game changer. But honestly, I guess all these lessons, I would say that about all these lessons, all the models, everything these guys come up with, they're all game changers. And the models are so amazing that to choose a favorite, it's like, harder to pick than a broken nose. But I really, really like this one. And I could sit down right now with you and I can give you example after example of stuff that students and builders and the kids are doing. And I can go over example after example. I have so much to share that I could sit with you from right now until the apocalypse, and I'd still not run out of material. But in the interest of time, I was on a conference call earlier. I opened it up and I asked some of my closest students to give me an example of this lesson in action. I knew I'd be doing this recording, so I had them come up with one that I should use. And the example that they picked was Harry Sturgis. Harry and Becky Sturgis, they work together, they're a team, but Becky was actually out of the picture for a little while. She was actually in the hospital. She was hospitalized. She was going in and out of so it was pretty much hairy when he was doing this. The point, though, is that they were having financial issues, and because of this, it not only changed their financial situation, but also helped save her life. And to understand what they did, let's pretend it's you. Let's pretend that you want to get into commercial real estate, all right? Specifically, apartment buildings. Now, using today's lesson of adding vision to brilliance, how would you do it? So first, you want to isolate pieces of brilliance, then you want to add to them, right? And remember, very few people think big, and even less people purposely try to think big or bigger than they're already thinking. And any of my students will tell you, no matter how big you're thinking, it's not big enough. You can always think bigger, but we have to start somewhere. So in this case, let's say that you find some of the best property managers in the area. Let's say you interview 5 of them, and you find out the best ideas and practices that they have and what they're doing to find and handle the best and highest profitable, most lucrative tenants. All right, you're going to get the most profitable things that they're doing right now, and you're going to turn them into policies for your business. After you talk to just a few of them, you're going to end up with a list of the best policies from the best people. And getting this information really comes down to how well trained you are. Here's one quick way. You call them up and you ask them what you should do. What questions should you ask them? What questions should you be asking property managers? What questions should you ask to find a property manager? So you have them come up with the checklist to evaluate them, and people like them. It's a really powerful concept. So after you get the policies, now you just need a method of execution, but something else comes first. Let's go back to you. Let's really walk through this example here. Let's imagine that you have the best policies on how to find good tenants and how to manage them. You just got them from your interviews with property managers. And the ideas that you got are currently being used to manage, let's say, 10 or 15 tenants or 10 or 15 units. Now you add some vision. You're going to take that brilliance, that demonstrated brilliance that you know is working effectively for these people, and you're going to add a little vision. So instead of doing it with just 10 or 15 units, you're going to do it with 500 units or 5,000. But if you're just starting out, we can go a little bit smaller and you can work your way up. So let's say you start out with just 25 or 30 units. By the way, this is an important note here. Even though this is much less, 25 or 30 units is much less than where you eventually want to be, just the fact that you have that vision in your mind, that you know that you're going to go to 500 or 5,000, or that you can go there, and the fact that you're thinking about that, you know where you want to go, it makes a big difference. It changes everything you're doing. So now you're going to take that brilliance and you're going to apply it in a larger way. Instead of 10 or 15, you're going to start with just 30. So you go to, let's say, a large apartment complex and you talk to them and you agree to do a mass lease, also called a master lease sometimes. What this basically means is you're going to lease in bulk. You're going to get a chunk of units and then you're going to do a sublease. You're going to sublease or sublet those units. And since you're buying in bulk, like whenever you buy anything in bulk, you're going to get a discount. And then the difference between what your tenants pay you and what you pay the complex or the apartments, that difference is your profit. So let's say you rent 30 units at $500 a month and then you rent them out for $1,000 a month. And let's say that after everything you net $250 a month per unit. That's on 30 units, $250 a month on 30 units, that's $7,500 a month. You see how that works, right? Now, we'll stop. Think about this from the complex, the apartment standpoint, because remember, our best interest principles, it's something we take very seriously. It's something that you want to consider in everything you do. It basically says anytime you do anything with anyone, you want to make sure it's in their best interest. Whenever you do anything for or with anybody, you want to make sure that it is what is in their best interest. So from the apartment owner's standpoint, here you are isolating, think about it from their standpoint. You're isolating the best ideas on how to find high-paying, high-quality, and low-maintenance tenants. You have the best ideas on how to do this, and instead of selling them or charging them huge money, you're willing to only get paid based on how much money they make. This is also why, unlike what most people in this business would tell you, you're not going to pay anything out of pocket or pay anything up front or down. In fact, in Harry's case, he gets paid up front. He gets paid up front to help people do this. And in case you haven't already guessed, this is exactly what he's doing. Well, I was just using you as an example to say if somebody was starting from zero, how would they do it? This is exactly what he's doing. He rents units in bulk and then he sublets them. He subleases them, and he uses the current management to carry out the better policies that he gets. He doesn't bring brilliance into the game. He brings vision. He gets the policies, and then with the management, with the complex's current management team, they're the ones that carry out the policies, and he has a spread that's built into it. And it's a huge benefit to the apartments, by the way, to have their own team carry out the policies, because if, let's say, they have 1,000 units and you have 50, they can carry out those policies with those other 950 units, right? But here's the secret. That's not what happens. More often than not, they're going to come back and they're going to want you to pick up another 50 or pick up another 50 or pick up another 50. They're going to want you to do more and more and more and help them execute those better policies with more units. They're going to want you involved. They're going to come back and give you more. That's usually what happens, because when you can perform, when you can give people what they want more of it. They want more of you. And think about this from another perspective. Look at what's happening and what you need to get started. There's no risk here, right? There's no money down. There's no loans, no credit, none of that. You're not even talking to the bank. And you could even start smaller with just a few units. Or you can do a GXM to test the waters. And if you don't know what that is, by the way, you're missing out on a universe of goodness. TheSmileStudies.com, go there for more on that. But you're taking existing brilliance and you're just adding vision. And by the way, when it comes to Harry, I won't even talk about how much money he's making altogether, but just from these two deals that we went over earlier, his net profit every month month was over $30,000. That's just from 2 deals and all the repeat and referral business that he got from those 2 deals. And this makes sense, right? You see how this works. You see how one thing leads to another, taking brilliance, applying it in a broader fashion, letting one thing lead to another, to another, to another. You're following this, right? Remember, opportunities multiply when they are seized. I was the first person to ever say that, and then out of nowhere's that mother grabber Sun Tzu stole it from me. Typical, so typical, son. Either way, it's a brilliant lesson that I think you should take note of because it can really help. And a few years ago, some years ago, more than a few years ago, I don't know if he was the head of the Landlord Association or just some high up guy, Gary Call, we've talked about him before. He was a big deal in San Francisco and throughout California. And I was doing a radio interview, and this is when it was around this time that I learned, because I go to these radio interviews and it's like they've got such a tiny audience. I'm thinking they've got 4 people listening and 3 of them are in the studio type of thing. But since then I've learned these smaller, smarter radio stations, they are smart enough to target their audiences. So although they may be smaller, they're so well targeted that it actually more than makes up for it. And it's more profitable to go to these stations than it is to go to hundreds of thousands or millions of people on those larger stations. Anyway, through one of these interviews, I connected with Gary, and he told me that what I just went over, what we just talked about, was like the most amazing explanation that he's ever heard in over 30 years of being in commercial real estate. He's like, it's absolutely brilliant. I love it. You guys, you know me, I hate to argue. So I was like, okay, Gary, you're right. And then he asked me to come out to his associations and help them, explain this to them. So I did that. And there was a guy there who eventually became a student, Oliver Drave. But before he became a student, he was a struggling commercial real estate guy. And he just gone completely off the cliff. He was over $4 million in the hole. He was in bankruptcy. His marriage fell apart. He was a mess. And so he didn't have a lot of the options of money or credit. And he'd already kind of had a tarnished reputation in the area. But he used this little lesson, just what we talked about today, isolating management policies and then applying them to multiple units through a bulk lease. First he got the policies, then he identified a method of execution through the management. This whole thing that we've been talking about, just from doing this and nothing else, he turned everything around. He got out of bankruptcy and he was making over 25 grand a month. Not huge, Bill Gates money, not billions, but still, better than a kick to the groin, right? And by the way, also, guess what else he did? He went back and he scooped up his old lady. He won her back. And I don't know exactly how it went down. I should say this first. Oliver's a big 80s fanatic, like movies and music, 80s memorabilia. He buys and collects all that stuff, all sorts of stuff from the 1980s. So I don't know exactly how that went down, how he won her back. But as I've told him, here's how I picture it. She was working on an assembly line at a factory. He walked in full military uniform. He strolled past her coworkers. He made his way back to her machine. He picked her up gracefully. And as he was carrying her outside, just as they were about to walk outside the door, she took his hat off his head and put it on her head. Yes, sir. That's exactly how it happened. Maybe not. But in all seriousness, I know a lot of people do have domestic issues where a spouse or a significant other, husband, wife, may or may not, see or appreciate your brilliance. And for those of you in that situation, you really need to ask yourself, what's going to change that for you? How are you going to vindicate yourself if you feel like you have to? Behavior never lies. If you want to be seen as a better person, be a better person. If you want to prove that your ambitions are worth attention and respect and that you're a better person and that you've learned from your mistakes, what do? Do you show up bankrupt with $4 million in debt? Or do you show up after you pulled yourself out of bankruptcy, after you've dealt with the $4 million and after you're making 25 grand a month? You see the difference? I hope you're taking notes, because this is how you win back a gold digger. Just kidding. I don't know what I'm talking about. You see how this works, right? Identifying brilliance, using your vision, expand on a larger scale. This was just one tiny microscopic example. I don't mean to minimize the results the students or the people involved. I'm just saying there's much more I could go over. Just in the interest of time, I kind of sped it up. And by the way, you probably know that when we invent, it's usually the other guys and gals here, not me, but when they invent different ways of making money or building companies or buying and selling companies or real estate, we break them up into different models. And this example from today is so brilliant that you must be thinking that it's a model on its own, right? That it must be a model on its own. This must be a model, right? It's easy to think that, but you'd be as wrong as bestiality, because everything that we talked about today is only a small part of something much larger called the invisible landlord model. That model has 5 parts, I think. This is just one section of one part. And I think that it's one section of part 1. I think in part 1 there's 4 sections. So take everything that we talked about today times 4, then multiply that shizzle by 5, and that comes out to 6 or something. But it gives you an idea of how profitable the breadth and how deep the badassery really goes with any given model. By the way, this is just one model. I don't even know how many models these guys invented. I stopped counting after 50 or 100. I don't know. It's nuts. And each model runs as its own business, a totally separate company. You can build your companies that way, where they all run. You have multiple little oil wells running 24/7. It's crazy. It's like these guys are building empires or something. If only there were a way for people to get trained to do this stuff. Oh man. Okay, let's wrap this up. Hopefully this all makes sense. It's easy to follow. You can go back. You can watch this as many times as you want and execute as much or as little as you want, but we got to wrap up here. So finally, remember this. Too often people validate their inaction by calling the consequences of their laziness concealed intentions. They will lower their ambitions and then adjust their lifestyle to match. Ambitions aren't determined by exertion. Exertions are determined by ambition. In other words, don't want what you get. Go get what you want. WeBuildEmpires.com. If applications are being accepted, I think it would be in your best interest to be all over it and do whatever it takes to apply and become accepted as a builder and get yourself trained. And to our homeboy Oliver Twist, you can be my wingman anytime. Okay, I gotta go. My meds are wearing off. All right, guys. Thank you so much for everything. Thanks for the support. I really appreciate it. And God bless.